Hello everyone, welcome to episode 3 of LEGO Rewind, where we take a look back at some old LEGO themes and the trends they started. You can find the whole series playlist in the description. Today we'll be comparing two very similar themes. Let's start with Rock Raiders, released in 1999, using cutscenes from the game to tell the story. I'm afraid I haven't played that game, so I won't be reviewing it or nothing, I just wanted to acknowledge it. In the probably not so distant future, the crew of the LMS Explorer are out mapping the galaxy when asteroids knock them into a wormhole that spits them into a different galaxy altogether. With their ship damaged and its power failing, they turn to a nearby planet rich with minerals that should give them enough of a kick to jump back to the Milky Way. With no other way home, they must brave the horrors lurking in its dark bowels or die alone on the mysterious planet. Right off the bat, I love this premise. It almost sounds like a kid-friendly version of Alien. Even the Explorer looks like something you'd see in one of those movies. I remember Bennett the Sage saying something in one of his older anime band reviews that really affected my view of sci-fi. He said there's a spectrum within which you'll find most stories that envision our future in space. At one end, you've got the likes of Star Trek, the optimists, where things are tidy and neat and people are free to pursue whatever goals fulfill them. Then you have Alien at the other end of the spectrum, the pessimist that paints a grimy, dim future where human lives are nothing in the eyes of the corporate overlords who put them up there to mine diamonds or whatever. Which, let's be honest, may be at least slightly more probable. Rock Raiders seems to lean about 3/4 towards that end of the spectrum, but not all the way. The crew of the Explorer at least appear well off, and exploring and trying space is as noble a reason as any to be up there, but it sure has the aesthetic down. I love the design of the Explorer itself, and I was pleasantly surprised to see in close-up shots that at least some parts of it actually are brick built. I also really like the designs of the characters. They all look so different, just wearing whatever clothes they had laying around. Probably worn them for a couple days already because they didn't have time to wash up or whatever. Some of them haven't shaved in a while. I'd say there was much of a step up in individualizing the minifigs in their time as the Ice Planet crew were several years before. Probably the most grounded, realistic bunch of faces we've seen in a LEGO Space sub-theme so far. It's hard for me to pick a favorite, but I'm leaning towards Jet. She's in the military, so she reminds me of Vasquez. But I don't want to leave out the real star of this line. Meet the Rock Monster, a stupid, primitive mess of a creature and probably the first big fig ever made. Does he count as a big fig? I think he should. The theme's dozen or so sets had a messy and surprisingly effective aesthetic. A big part of it is the color choices. If I told you today that an upcoming line of LEGO sets was mostly going to consist of various shades of gray, with a little black and brown and smatterings of yellow, dark turquoise, and transparent fluorescent green, and even the occasional bit of trans orange, you might see a pukey mess in your head. And by all means, all these colors side by side shouldn't look good together. It flies in the face of color theory, but Rock Raiders makes it work. It gives the vehicles an earthy, run-down feel, like some of them haven't even been fully painted by whatever company supplied them to the crew. And the bits of turquoise and yellow stop them from feeling too glum. They just have a cool industrial vibe that fits the dark environment they're working in. Before I give my final thoughts on this theme, let's jump around and look at Power Miners, released in 2009. This story is a little different. Something deep underground is making Earth's surface unstable, and natural disasters are reaching apocalyptic proportions. So the Power Miners embark to find the source, which turns out to be a race of super-powered rock monsters hopped up on energy crystals. Yeah, some things never change. The story may not quite be something to write home about, but the sets are good. I actually still have some of these, sorta. I dug them out of my dad's attic at his place after leaving them up there for years. Those who have been following me long enough on DA may even remember these photos I took 8 years ago. I'll link them in the description. Fun fact, the giant black wheel on this revamp I made was cannibalized from this set, which I've since replaced with another wheel. They have a much more uniform color scheme than the Rock Raiders. Bright colors like lime green and orange, and a little bit of white, which makes them feel a little more like the mining equipment used today. Rock Raiders vehicles feel like they'd already seen some use or been cobbled together from pieces of other ones. But these feel like they were just shipped out and put to work recently, and the crew all wear the same blue overalls and helmets that do at least make them pop against the colors of the vehicles. I also like the placement of the orange being almost exclusively on the actual digging bits, highlighting their usefulness. I can see how this more unified look will make Power Miners less interesting to some people, but I think it works the same way most space themes do. I will say I don't care much for the minifigs. They do have some personality, like this Bruce Campbell-looking chum, but they're pretty weak sauce compared to the Rock Raiders crew. The vehicles focused on functions, mostly technic-based, to feel like they're really digging, and most of these functions, from what I've seen, work great. The first wave made a strong first impression, showing the theme's best qualities in almost every set. One of the things that appeals to me most about this line is the all builds. These fit right in with the actual sets, and they are so inspiring. I have no doubt someone out there bought doubles of these sets just so they could have the normal builds and the all builds on the same shelf. I'm surprised by just how many of these they were able to whip up. and I could see different uses for each one, and they look great together. The first two waves were solid, the second maybe a little less so, as they seemed to put their best foot forward in wave 1. But things got a little weird after that. Anyone who's seen the core will get the idea. Power Miners took an interesting turn in 2010, as they broke below the mantle and found lava monsters. Not needing to dig any deeper, they beefed up their equipment to endure the heat, and the focus shifted from digging to weakening the lava monsters with water and capturing them. The drills and saws were replaced with grabby claws and pretend water guns, and these parts were changed from orange to blue, to better convey the water theme. I used to think this was an ugly color combination, but it's probably the best choice they could have made, especially needing to stand out against these mostly orange backgrounds. I only got one of these sets, and to my surprise, it actually looks good next to the earlier waves. I wish they went a little further with a miner's protective gear. Coming down this far would be like standing on the surface of Venus. You'd have to wear a protective spacesuit so the air wouldn't burn the inner lining of your lungs. Whatever. This second year was disappointingly short-lived. Only 4 of the theme's almost 20-ish sets were released in this wave, and then the theme just disappeared. And this is something I've seen happen to a couple of other themes, like Atlantis, a theme I'm sure made Mtron fans happy with all the new parts. The first wave was strong, the second was more of the same, and then a third wave comes along the next year that changes up the aesthetic a little bit, and then the theme just ends. At least Atlantis had a story that got resolved. Power Miners is just left open as far as I can tell, though I do find it neat that Brains, a member of the Power Miners crew, would later join the Atlantis crew on their mission. That's something nice LEGO does now and then. They show a bit of crossover between their themes with 1 or 2 characters appearing in new ones. One example is Solomon Blaze of Galaxy Squad, leading the Ultra Agents when he's older. But yeah, this is such a weird trend I've noticed. His theme's getting a pretty full first year, and then going belly up with barely a whimper when the second year's just starting. I guess 3 waves is okay for any system theme. It's just an awkward way to end it sometimes. I gave Rock Raiders points for its unique look earlier, but I don't want to heap too much praise on it. The builds aren't exactly great, consisting of many giant pieces whipped up for this theme. The cockpits, those beams, the rock monsters, all of those throw the price to part ratio out of whack. For those who are new to this, the price to part or price to piece ratio isn't exactly a rule, but it's generally taken for granted that on average, you should expect around 100 pieces for every 10 US dollars you spend on a set. There are a lot of exceptions to this, like construction lines that use big, detailed pieces that are expensive to mold, or sets that feature large animals and dinosaurs that eat up a lot of plastic, or planes or other vehicles that are half made up of huge panels or covers, or even licensed themes like Star Wars. This is why you might see an X-Wing with about 450 pieces retail for what you'd think would be worth 600 pieces, or a new X-Wing that has about 700 pieces retail for what you'd think would be 900 pieces. LEGO has to pay to use that property, which in turn affects the customer as the price may be bumped up a bit higher than we're normally comfortable paying. Even minifigs are getting expensive to make, and the value of one of today's minifigs is considered to be $3 or $4. This set may seem way too expensive for its piece count, but it includes 4 minifigures, not including the Womp, and it's a Star Wars set, so at least a few of those tacked on $5 are going towards the minifigures, and the rest are Disney's cut. And at the end of the day, a single stud doesn't cost as much to make as a piece like this does. What's nice about the LEGO Ninjago movie sets is because Ninjago is one of LEGO's own original properties, they don't have to give anyone else a cut for a license, and on top of that, they have a theatrical movie they can expect to drive more traffic towards the sets than any commercial would, so they can afford to keep the price down a ways. This is why most of the sets in this line are so darn big and have so many pieces for their prices. But don't think I'm singling out Rock Raiders for riding a little high on the price to part ratio. Power Miners is guilty of this too. Some of them are fair, like the Granite Grinder, Claw Digger, and Boulder Blaster, but I'd say that's probably thanks to there being lots of small, easy-to-produce pieces like you see in this heavily detailed engine block. But when you look at something like the Cave Crusher, what do you see? 12 big tires clumped together on 6 wheels, the saw blades on the front, and a big fig that has a lever on the back that moves his arm and everything. And those pieces cost money. It really isn't all bad though. I'd still say the overall price to part ratio is a little fairer than Rock Raiders, even if only slightly. This is a pretty extreme example. You'd only be getting 90 pieces for $20, and that isn't even taking inflation into account. It just has a lot of big pieces. I'd say that's the only weak point this line has, but it is a big weak point for a building toy to have only so-so builds. In terms of having an atmosphere and a look and feel unique to itself that's made it memorable, Rock Raiders is cool, man. It is not hard to see why there's some pretty hardcore fans. While Ice Planet has inspired mechs aplenty and Life on Mars are pretty scant, Rock Raiders and Power Miners have both inspired a decent amount of mechs over the years. Ultimately, I think these are both good themes. I just think Power Miners has more detailed involving builds with fun features, while Rock Raiders has more character. They each have strengths that seem to make up for the weaknesses of the other, if that makes any sense. It's hard to say which has more substance, as you can have a great build that's still bland, but you don't want it to be all flash either. But as a toy, I'd say Power Miners has at least a slight edge. Which of these lines did you like back in the day? Anyone here dip their toes into both of them? If you enjoyed this series and wanted to continue, you can make it easier by sharing these videos and checking out my books. That support makes it worth the time it takes to make these, but I can't do this in a vacuum. In the next episode, we'll be going to a time before the time before time. Toodles!
Don't stay up late. Okay.